The crowd roared, a deafening wave of alien voices, laughter and cheers that echoed through the massive Colosseum. It was a structure beyond human comprehension, floating in deep space, surrounded by a force field shimmering like liquid glass. Billions of alien spectators, from hundreds of different species, filled the seats, their glowing eyes fixated on the center of the arena. Massive holograms projected the scene across the galaxy, broadcasting the spectacle to countless worlds. In the middle of the vast battlefield stood Captain Elias Riker, a human soldier, battered and bruised. His military uniform was torn, his hands shackled with glowing energy cuffs, and his face streaked with dirt and blood. He squinted against the blinding lights above, his heart pounding like a war drum inside his chest. He was the last human standing. On a grand floating throne at the edge of the Colosseum, the Tselver Emperor watched with an amused smirk. His elongated, silver-skinned body reclined lazily as his glowing eyes observed the human before him. He lifted a goblet filled with a shimmering golden liquid and took a slow sip before addressing the crowd. "Behold, the last remnant of a dying species." His voice boomed through the arena, enhanced by unseen technology. The so-called humans, a weak, primitive race that dared to challenge the supremacy of the Tselver Empire. And now, they stand here, not as warriors, but as entertainment. The crowd erupted into laughter, a mixture of deep guttural growls, high-pitched screeches, and eerie insectoid clicks. Riker clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He had been trained to endure humiliation, but this was beyond anything he had ever faced. A massive holographic screen flickered to life above the arena, displaying scenes from Earth's last battle. He watched helplessly as footage played of orbital bombardments, human cities reduced to ashes, and soldiers vaporized by alien weaponry. The video ended with an image of a burning Earth, floating helplessly in the darkness of space. "Pathetic," the Emperor sneered. "Your people thought they could resist us, that they could fight against a civilization 1,000 times more advanced. We did not even need to send our armies to conquer you. We simply let our AI warships do the work. And now, here you are, the last human to amuse us before we erase your kind from history forever." Riker remained silent, his fists tightening against the restraints. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. He stared directly at the Emperor, unblinking. The Emperor chuckled, still defiant. "How quaint. Very well. Let us see how long your defiance lasts against our champion." With a flick of his clawed fingers, the energy cuffs binding Riker's hands clicked open. The ground beneath him rumbled as the arena shifted. Giant mechanical gears moved, the floor splitting apart to reveal a massive underground chamber. A low, inhuman growl echoed from the depths. The crowd fell silent, anticipation thick in the air. Even among the most savage alien species present, there was fear. A towering figure emerged from the darkness. Standing at nearly 12 feet tall, covered in dark metallic armor fused with organic muscle, was the reigning champion of the Tselver gladiatorial pits, the Mauler. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Riker, its breathing a mechanical hiss. Its arms were unnaturally long, ending in razor-sharp claws capable of slicing through reinforced steel. A deep scar ran down its monstrous face, a reminder of the countless battles it had survived. Riker had no weapons, no armor, no enhancements, just his mind and his body. "Let the game begin," the Emperor declared, and a deafening gong echoed through the Colosseum. The Mauler charge. Riker barely dodged, rolling to the side as the beast's claws tore through the ground where he had stood a second ago. The impact sent a shockwave of dust and debris into the air. The crowd erupted in excitement, already expecting the human to be slaughtered within seconds. But Riker was fast, faster than they expected. He had studied every fight that had taken place in this Colosseum. He had watched how previous warriors fell, not because they were weak, but because they relied on brute force instead of strategy. He couldn't outmatch the Mauler's strength, but he didn't need to. The Mauler roared and attacked again, swiping its massive arm toward him. Instead of retreating, Riker did the unexpected. He ran straight toward it. At the last second, he dove between its legs, using the monster's own momentum against it. The Mauler stumbled forward, its claws digging into the ground, creating deep trenches. Gasps rippled through the audience. Riker didn't stop. He analyzed the battlefield, scanning for anything he could use. That's when he saw it, a faint flicker in the air near the edge of the arena, a cloaking distortion field. His eyes narrowed. A malfunctioning section of the force field. The Mauler turned and lunged again, its massive hand swinging toward Riker's head. He ducked at the last moment, and the beast's claw sliced through one of the arena's metallic pillars instead. Sparks flew, and Riker saw his chance. He sprinted toward the cloaking distortion, heart hammering. The Mauler was right behind him. The entire arena shook with its monstrous footsteps. Just a few feet away from the flickering energy field, Riker dropped to the ground and rolled. The Mauler, unable to stop in time, plunged straight through the distortion. And then, a deafening explosion. The force field had malfunctioned, and as soon as the Mauler passed through it, the unstable energy tore its body apart. The creature howled in agony as it disintegrated midair, its armored limbs scattering in all directions. A burst of electrical energy spread across the battlefield, causing holographic screens to glitch and sparks to rain down from above. For the first time in the Coliseum's history, silence. Then, an eruption of outraged screams and furious protests. The audience couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The invincible champion had been defeated, not by brute strength, not by advanced weaponry, but by a mere human's intelligence. Up on his throne, the Emperor's expression darkened. His once amused smirk was gone. He stood slowly, gripping the edges of his throne with sharp, clawed fingers. This is impossible," he hissed under his breath. Riker, breathing heavily, looked up at the stunned crowd. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, cracked his knuckles, and then smiled. "Guess the show isn't over yet," he said. And for the first time in history, billions of aliens witnessed something they had never expected: fear in the eyes of their own emperor. The silence in the Colosseum didn't last long. It was soon replaced by an explosion of voices, some furious, some in shock, but all unable to process what had just happened. The Mauler was gone, defeated, and not just by anyone, but by a human. A species they had mocked, humiliated, and considered nothing more than an evolutionary mistake. Captain Elias Riker stood in the center of the arena, his chest rising and falling with every heavy breath. His hands were scraped, his muscles ached, and his body begged for rest. But he had no time for that. Not now. Not in this place. He glanced up at the towering figure of the Xelver Emperor, whose once amused expression had turned into something darker. Anger, contempt, and something else, something Riker hadn't seen before. Fear. The Emperor leaned forward, gripping the armrests of his throne with sharp, talon-like fingers. His glowing yellow eyes burned into Riker's. "A fluke," the Emperor declared, though his voice lacked the confidence it held before. "A statistical impossibility. But very well. You want to prove yourself human. Then let's see how long your luck lasts." The ground beneath Riker trembled. He instinctively widened his stance, bracing for whatever was coming next. Across the Colosseum, alien spectators whispered, murmured, and hissed among themselves. Some were outraged, demanding Riker's immediate execution. Others, though, were intrigued. Was this human truly as weak as they believed, or was there something more to his kind? The floor split apart once more, revealing another massive chamber below. A mechanical hum filled the air, followed by the chilling sound of whirring metal and shifting gears. Riker's eyes darted around, scanning for any clues. The last challenge had been a test of brute force, one he barely survived. This time, it would be something different, something worse. The Emperor's voice echoed through the arena, filled with amusement once again. Since you are so resourceful, let's see how you fare in a battle that no organic creature has ever won. Welcome to the deadliest game. The platform beneath Riker jerked downward, sending him plummeting into the darkness below. He landed with a rough thud, rolling onto his side before pushing himself up. The air down here was cold, sterile, filled with the scent of metal and machine oil. Then the lights flickered on. Riker's stomach twisted. He was standing inside a massive zero-gravity labyrinth, a maze of interconnected tunnels, floating platforms, and spinning mechanical traps. The walls pulsed with an eerie blue glow, constantly shifting, making it impossible to memorize any path. But the worst part wasn't the maze itself. It was what lurked inside. A low, mechanical chittering echoed through the chamber, then another, and another. Riker's jaw tightened. He knew that sound. He had heard it before, during Earth's final battle. Hunter drones. The first one appeared, gliding effortlessly through the air with spider-like metallic limbs, its glowing red eyes scanning the maze. Then another, and another. Within seconds, dozens of them emerged, moving like predators sniffing out prey. Riker's mind raced. These things were programmed to kill anything that moved. No weapons, no armor. And in zero gravity, he couldn't even rely on normal movement. One wrong step, and he'd drift helplessly into a trap. A voice crackled in his ear. At first, he thought it was interference, but then he recognized it. "Riker, can you hear me?" His eyes widened. That voice, Sergeant Vale, one of the last remaining human soldiers captured alongside him. He hadn't heard her voice since their imprisonment. "Vale," he whispered. "Keep your voice down," she hissed. "We don't have much time. There are 4 of us left, including you. They dropped us in different sections of the maze. If we want to survive, we need to work together." Riker pressed himself against a wall as a drone hovered past, scanning for movement. "How do we regroup?" "See the glowing markers on the walls," Vale said. "They flicker in a pattern. It's a code. If you time your movements with the flickers, the drones won't detect you." Riker glanced at the walls. She was right. The glow pulsed in short bursts, almost like a heartbeat. He took a deep breath, watching the pattern carefully. 1, 2, 3. Move. He pushed off the wall, floating through the air just as the lights dimmed. The drone didn't react. He landed on a platform ahead and kept moving. Minutes felt like hours as he navigated the maze, dodging drones, avoiding spinning saw traps, and timing every movement perfectly. Finally, he reached a central chamber where Vale and the others were waiting. Private Duran and Corporal Hesh, the last survivors of their squad. Duran was injured, a deep gash running across his arm. Hesh was armed with a small plasma torch he must have stolen from a fallen guard. "We don't have long," Vale said. "The Emperor won't let us just wander around. He's watching. He wants us to put on a show. So let's give him one," Riker muttered. They huddled together, forming a plan. The drones were heat-seeking. They tracked movement based on body temperature. The maze's shifting walls were part of their strategy. They forced prey into open spaces where the drones could hunt them down. But there was a flaw. Riker had seen it. Every time a section of the maze moved, the energy distortion caused the drones to temporarily pause, recalibrating their scans. A small window. A weakness. "We need to get to the main control console," Riker said. "It's hidden somewhere in this maze. If we can override the system, we can turn these drones against the Excelver." "That's suicide," Hesh muttered. "Even if we find it, we'd need a distraction big enough to make the Emperor think he's winning," Riker finished. They didn't have much time. The drones were closing in. Hesh used the plasma torch to melt through a panel in the wall, exposing the maze's internal wiring. Duran, despite his injury, rerouted a power conduit, causing a false energy surge. The drones immediately reacted, swarming toward the surge, thinking it was a target. That was their opening. Riker and Vale sprinted toward the central console, dodging traps, ducking under mechanical arms, and barely avoiding instant death. The control panel was massive, covered in alien script. Riker had no idea what half of it meant, but he didn't need to. He grabbed two exposed wires and jammed them together, sending an override signal through the system. The drones stopped. The audience above gasped. The Emperor leaned forward. Then, the drones turned, their glowing red eyes now locked onto the HFY soldiers guarding the maze's perimeter. Chaos erupted. The drones swarmed the guards, tearing through their ranks. The crowd panicked, watching as their own creations turned against them. Up in his throne, the Emperor's claws dug into the armrest. This wasn't just a fluke. This wasn't just luck. The humans were adapting, learning, winning. And for the first time, the HFY began to fear them. The control room flickered with red warning lights. Sirens blared through the massive coliseum, their shrill cries echoing across the alien spectators. The HFY guards scrambled to contain the chaos, but the damage had already been done. The hunter drones, once a symbol of the Empire's technological supremacy, were now attacking their own masters. Captain Elias Riker crouched beside the control panel, sweat dripping from his brow. His heart pounded like a war drum as he watched the drones rip through the alien guards, their razor-sharp limbs cutting through armor like paper. The plan had worked. They had turned the HFY's own creations against them. But this was just the beginning. Behind him, Sergeant Vale, Private Duran, and Corporal Hesh stood ready, their eyes locked on the battlefield unfolding before them. The odds were still against them, but for the first time since their capture, there was a chance. A real chance to escape. Vale scanned the upper levels of the Colosseum. We need to get out of here before the Emperor figures out how to regain control. Riker nodded. Then let's move. The four soldiers sprinted through the shifting maze, ducking beneath collapsing walls and leaping over electrified gaps. Duran winced with every step, his wounded arm still bleeding, but he kept moving. There was no time to stop. The drones weren't going to hold off the HFY forever. They'd reached the outer doors, a massive set of reinforced gates leading deeper into the HFY fortress. The security locks were still engaged. Riker turned to Hesh, who was already pulling a small device from his belt, a stolen plasma detonator. "Step back," Hesh muttered. The charge detonated with a thunderous boom, sending metal shrapnel flying. As the smoke cleared, the doors remained standing, but the locking mechanism was fried. Vale shoved her shoulder into the panel, and with a groan of protest, the doors slid open just enough for them to squeeze through. The hallway beyond was dark, illuminated only by flickering emergency lights. The walls pulsed with alien energy, casting eerie shadows along the curved metallic corridors. "We're in," Duran panted, pressing his wounded arm. "Now what?" Riker glanced around. They needed weapons, transport, a way to escape. But most importantly, "We need to find the command center," he said. "If we can access their systems, we can locate a hangar or escape pods." Vale exhaled sharply, breaking into its HFY command center. Easy. They moved quickly, staying low, avoiding patrols. The fortress was vast, but Riker had studied its layout during his imprisonment. He knew where to go. Minutes later, they reached a central control hub. It was heavily guarded. Dozens of HFY soldiers stood in formation, their weapons humming with deadly energy. At the center of the room was a holographic display showing the entire Colosseum, including the chaos still unfolding. Then something caught Riker's eye. A fleet of HFY ships docked in a nearby hangar. Their way out. But before they could move, the air suddenly crackled with static. A voice, deep and commanding, echoed through the chamber. "Drop your weapons, humans. Surrender now, and I may grant you mercy." Riker turned toward the source. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, armored, and unmistakably human. For a brief moment, hope surged through Riker's chest. A survivor, a captured soldier, someone who had infiltrated the Selvar ranks. Then he saw the insignia on the man's shoulder. Commander Adrian Wolf. And the hope vanished. Betrayal ran cold through Riker's veins. Impossible, Vale whispered, her voice shaking. Adrian Wolf had been a high-ranking officer in the Earth Defense Forces, one of the most brilliant strategists humanity had. He had led battles against the Selvar, had fought beside Riker and Vale in the final days before Earth fell. He was supposed to be dead. Yet here he stood, clad in Selvar armor, his once proud human uniform replaced by the colors of the enemy. His face, though still familiar, was hardened, emotionless. You're alive. Duran choked out. Wolf took a slow step forward. Alive? No. I survived. There's a difference. Riker's hands curled into fists. You're working with them. Wolf didn't flinch. I made a choice. A choice. Vale spat. You betrayed your own people. Wolf's expression remained unreadable. Humanity was doomed the moment we picked a fight we couldn't win. You saw it, Riker. We lost. We were weak. The Selvar offered me something better, a place among the victors. Riker's blood boiled. You think they see you as an equal. He gestured toward the Selvar guards standing around them. They don't care about you. You're a pet. Wolf. A useful tool. And when they don't need you anymore, they'll throw you away like the rest of us. Wolf's jaw tightened. I am not your enemy, Riker, but if you force my hand, I won't hesitate. The air grew thick with tension. The Selvar soldiers raised their weapons. Riker's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but he wasn't about to kneel before a traitor. Then, the fortress shook violently. The ground trembled as distant explosions roared through the corridors. The holographic display flickered, showing sections of the Selvar fleet under attack. Riker's confusion lasted only a second before he understood. The drones. By overriding the maze's security, they hadn't just turned the hunter drones against the Colosseum guards. They had triggered a system-wide malfunction. Now, the Selvar's own war machines were attacking their fleet. This was their chance. Riker lunged. Everything happened at once. Gunfire erupted. Vale tackled a Selvar soldier, wrestling his weapon from his hands. Duran fired a stolen blaster, hitting one of the enemy guards in the chest. Hesh threw a plasma grenade, sending a shockwave through the command center. Riker went straight for Wolf. The two men collided like two forces of nature. Fists swinging, old comrades turned enemies. Wolf was fast. His training had never dulled. But Riker fought like a man with nothing to lose. He dodged, countered, and struck with everything he had. You're fighting for nothing, Riker, Wolf grunted, dodging a punch. Earth is gone. Humanity is over. Riker slammed a knee into Wolf's ribs, not while I'm still breathing. The battle raged, but Riker knew they couldn't hold this position for long. More Selvar reinforcements would come. They needed to move. Now. Vale. The hangar. Riker shouted. Vale nodded, rallying the others. Let's go. Riker delivered one last punch to Wolf's face, sending him sprawling to the ground. Then, without hesitation, he turned and ran. As they sprinted toward the hangar, alarms blared overhead. The Selvar fleet was in chaos, their forces fighting both the drones and the humans. Their betrayal was spreading like wildfire. Riker didn't look back. There was no time. Because now, the real fight was about to begin. The hangar was chaos. Explosions rattled the walls as alarms blared across the Selvar fortress. The hunter drones, still rogue from Riker's override, were wreaking havoc, attacking both soldiers and ships. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and the ozone tang of plasma fire. Captain Elias Riker sprinted through the carnage, his mind locked onto one objective: get off this planet. Vale, Duran, and Hesh were right behind him, dodging gunfire, and leaping over fallen HFY bodies. "There," Vale shouted, pointing to a sleek, dark warship near the back of the hangar. "That's our way out." Riker didn't hesitate. He bolted toward the vessel, but before they could reach it, a plasma bolt sizzled past his head, striking the floor in front of him. He skidded to a stop. A line of HFY warriors stood between them and the ship, weapons raised. And at the center of them, stepping forward with measured calm, was Commander Adrian Wolf. His face was bruised from their earlier fight, but his eyes burned with cold fury. He adjusted his collar, wiped the blood from his lip, and smirked. "You really don't know when to quit, do you, Riker?" Riker clenched his fists. "Move." Wolf shook his head. "I can't do that." The standoff stretched between them, the air tense and electric. Plasma bolts whizzed overhead. Explosions rumbled in the distance. But in this moment, nothing else existed except the two of them. Riker knew they didn't have time for this. They needed to act. Fast. But then Wolf spoke again. And what he said made Riker's blood run cold. "You still don't get it," Wolf said. "You still think this is about war, about survival." He took a step forward. "But you've been fighting the wrong enemy this whole time." Riker narrowed his eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" Wolf gestured to the chaos around them. "The HFY aren't the real threat. They never were." Duran scoffed. "They wiped out Earth. They enslaved us. What the hell do you mean they aren't the real threat?" Wolf's smirk faded. For the first time, something dark flickered in his eyes. Not arrogance, not superiority. Something else. Fear. Riker saw it, and suddenly something in his gut twisted. Wolf exhaled sharply, then spoke the words that changed everything. Earth was already doomed before the HFY ever arrived. The words hit like a gut punch. For a moment, Riker thought he misheard him. But Wolf kept talking. "The HFY didn't conquer Earth," Wolf continued. "They saved it." Silence. Even Vale, usually quick to lash out, said nothing. The idea was so absurd, so utterly impossible, that none of them could process it. "You're lying," Hesh said, voice tight. Wolf shook his head. "I wish I was." He took another step forward. "The war we fought, the one we thought we lost, it was never about territory. It was never about power. The HFY weren't invading us." He paused. "They were running." Riker's jaw tightened. Running from what? Wolf didn't answer right away. He glanced at the walls of the hangar, at the burning ships, at the dying HFY soldiers gasping for air. Then, finally, he spoke. "A force older than anything we've ever known. Something that doesn't just destroy civilizations, it erases them." He locked eyes with Riker. "The HFY call them the Hollow Ones." Riker had never heard that name before, but something about it sent a chill through his entire body. Wolf kept talking. "They don't leave survivors. They don't take prisoners. They don't invade planets." He hesitated. "They consume them." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Riker wanted to reject it, wanted to call it nonsense. But deep down, something about it felt right. Earth's destruction had been too sudden, the war too short. The HFY had obliterated human forces in months, but then stopped. Why? Why not just wipe out the rest of humanity immediately? Because they hadn't come to conquer. They had come to flee. Vale's voice was quieter than usual. "If that's true, why didn't they tell us?" Wolf's expression darkened. "Would you have believed them?" The question lingered. And the worst part was, Riker didn't have an answer. He thought back to everything he had seen. The HFY's obsession with order, their militaristic expansion, their relentless need to control. They weren't conquerors. They were desperate survivors, and humanity had been caught in the crossfire of a war far greater than they ever realized. Riker exhaled. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He wanted to deny it, wanted to keep fighting, But now, with this truth staring him in the face, he realized that maybe, just maybe, everything they thought they knew was a lie. A thunderous explosion rocked the hangar, snapping them back to reality. The fortress was collapsing. The drones had taken out the main reactor. They had minutes before this place turned into a fireball. Riker shoved the thoughts away. There wasn't time to process this. He could deal with the truth later. Right now, they had to escape. He locked eyes with Wolf again. You can either stand there and die, or help us get off this rock. For the first time, Wolf hesitated. His jaw tightened, but after a long moment, he sighed and turned to the Selvar soldiers. Stand down, he ordered. The warriors didn't move at first, their bodies tense. But then, with visible reluctance, they lowered their weapons. Riker didn't waste another second. Move. Now. They sprinted for the ship. The ground trembled beneath them. The ceiling cracked, fire bursting through the seams. They reached the vessel just as a massive shockwave rippled through the hangar. Riker leaped onto the loading ramp, Vale and the others right behind him. The doors sealed shut just as the fortress began to collapse. Riker stumbled into the cockpit, hitting the ignition sequence. The ship roared to life, its engines flaring. He gripped the controls, heart pounding. The ship shot forward, blasting out of the hangar as the entire fortress imploded behind them. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, as they broke through the planet's atmosphere, Vale leaned over, staring at the screen showing the wreckage below. She exhaled. What the hell did we just escape from? Riker didn't answer, because for the first time, he wasn't sure. They had survived. They had escaped. But now, the real war was just beginning. The stolen Selvar warship rocketed through space, its engines burning hotter than they were ever designed to. Alarms blared through the cockpit as the ship weaved between enemy fire. The massive battle unfolding behind them was unlike anything Riker had ever seen. Earth's survivors, what little remained of them, had returned for revenge. The remnants of humanity's fleet, patched together warships, scavenged alien tech, and a determination forged from the ashes of their fallen world, had launched a full-scale assault on the Selvar homeworld. The enemy had spent years mocking humanity, calling them weak, insignificant. Now, they were learning just how wrong they had been. Riker, incoming fighters. Vale shouted from the co-pilot's seat. Riker's hands gripped the controls as a squadron of Selvar interceptors closed in behind them. Plasma bolts streaked past the ship, barely missing the hull. Hold on. Riker yanked the controls, sending the ship into a tight spiral. The G-force slammed into him, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. From the back of the ship, Duran and Hesh manned the turret cannons, firing back at the pursuing enemies. Explosions bloomed in the void as 2 interceptors went down, but more were still coming. This isn't gonna work forever, Hesh called out. We need a plan. Riker glanced at the holographic display, searching for options. Their ship was fast but outgunned. The Selvar homeworld's defenses were brutal. Orbital cannons, drone swarms, and warships the size of cities. Humanity's fleet was putting up one hell of a fight, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. We need to take out the control station, Riker said. That's where the Selvar are coordinating their entire defense. If we knock it out, they'll be blind. Vale's fingers flew over the console. Found it. Command Spire, Central City. It's heavily shielded, but... She stopped, eyes widening. But what? Vale swallowed hard. It's got an internal reactor. If we hit it hard enough, we don't just take out the station. We take out half their fleet. Silence filled the cockpit. They all knew what that meant. A reactor that size couldn't be taken out from the outside. Someone had to go in. Hesh exhaled sharply. So that's it, we pull a suicide run. Riker's jaw clenched. Not we. Me. Duran shook his head. No way, Captain. We go together or not at all. Riker turned, his gaze hard. That's an order, Duran. For the first time since this war began, his squad looked at him with something other than just respect. They looked at him with the pain of knowing they might never see him again. Vale's hands tightened into fists. Damn it, Riker. He forced a smile. Hey, it's not the first time I've pulled off something crazy. Duran scoffed. Yeah, but it's usually the rest of us paying for it. Riker reached over and pressed a sequence on the console, transferring the ship's controls to Vale. Get clear. Get back to the fleet. Humanity still needs you. Vale's eyes burned with emotion, but she didn't argue. She knew him too well. She knew there was no changing his mind. With one final look at his team, his family, Riker grabbed a plasma charge pack and sprinted toward the airlock. As the door sealed behind him, Vale's voice came through his comm. You'd better make this count. He smirked. Always. Then he launched into the abyss. The command spire loomed ahead, its shields glowing with energy. There was only one way in. A narrow maintenance tunnel at the base of the station. If he timed it wrong, the defense cannons would rip him apart before he ever made it. He gritted his teeth and fired his thrusters, angling his approach. Plasma bolts filled the space around him. His armor's warning systems screamed as shrapnel cut through the void, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't. The tunnel entrance rushed toward him. 5 seconds. He adjusted his trajectory. 4 seconds. The targeting system locked onto him. Warning sirens blared. 3 seconds. He twisted his body, spinning past an incoming blast. 2 seconds. The entrance was right there. Impact. He crashed through the opening, slamming hard against the tunnel walls, his thrusters sputtering from the rough entry. His body screamed in protest, but he pushed forward. The interior of the command spire was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Rows of glowing data conduits stretched across the walls, pulsating with alien energy. The reactor chamber was deep within, and it was heavily guarded. 2 Selvar enforcers rounded the corner. Riker didn't hesitate. He moved like a ghost, slipping between them before they even registered his presence. His knife flashed once, twice, and they collapsed. No time to stop. He pushed forward, dodging patrols, weaving through the labyrinthine corridors until he reached the core chamber. The reactor pulsed with raw power, its containment field glowing like a miniature star. Riker pulled the plasma charges from his pack and started setting them. 1, 2, 3. A deep, rumbling growl echoed through the chamber. He turned. Standing at the far entrance was a Selvar warlord, 7 feet tall, clad in ceremonial battle armor, eyes burning with pure hatred. Riker knew he was outmatched. But he wasn't here to win. The warlord lunged. Riker sidestepped, narrowly avoiding a bladed gauntlet aimed for his throat. He fired his pistol twice, but the rounds bounced off the warlord's armor. The alien warrior swung again, catching Riker in the ribs. Pain exploded through his body. He hit the ground hard, vision blurred, chest heaving. The warlord stood over him, raising his weapon for the final strike. Riker smiled. Too late. He slammed his fist against the detonator. The charges ignited. A wave of blinding white light engulfed the chamber as the reactor imploded. The last thing Riker saw was the warlord's look of realization, then nothing. Outside, the battlefield changed in an instant. The command spire erupted into a chain reaction of explosions, sending shockwaves through the Selvar fleet. The shields collapsed. The Selvar forces, once an unstoppable empire, were suddenly defenseless. From the distance, Vale watched from the cockpit of their stolen ship. She had known this would happen. She had known he wouldn't make it back. Still, when the explosion lit up the sky, her hands tightened around the controls as her breath caught in her throat. Duran and Hesh were silent. No words needed to be said. Riker was gone. But he had won. Humanity had struck back. And thanks to him, they would rise again. The battlefield was silent. For the first time in years, the HFY War fleet, once an unstoppable force that had crushed entire civilizations, was in ruins. Fires burned across the remains of their command ships. Their once mighty homeworld now lay in darkness, shattered by the explosion of the command spire. And in the midst of that wreckage, humanity's survivors drifted in their battered ships, staring at the destruction. They had won. But at what cost? Vale sat in the cockpit of their stolen HFY warship, hands gripping the controls as she stared at the debris field. The command station was gone. The heart of the HFY Empire had been ripped out. But so had Elias Riker. He was gone. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. The loss hit her like a blade to the chest, but there was no time to grieve. Not yet. Hesh's voice crackled over the comms. Vale. What now? She looked at the sensor display. The remaining HFY ships were in complete disarray. Leaderless. Broken. Some tried to retreat, but they had nowhere to run. Duran's voice was cold. We finished this. Vale glanced at him. His face was unreadable, but she knew the rage boiling inside him. They all had it. But something held her back. She turned back to the screen. The HFY were killers, conquerors. They had mocked humanity, enslaved them, wiped out Earth like it was nothing. They deserved to burn. And yet, something about this felt wrong. She thought about what Wolf had told them before he died, about the real enemy lurking in the void, the Hollow Ones, the ancient force that had driven the HFY into their warpath. Riker had died taking down the Empire's war machine, but if they wiped out the HFY completely, who would be left to stand when the Hollow Ones arrived? She exhaled sharply. Send a transmission, she ordered. Duran frowned. What? To the HFY fleet. Hesh blinked. You can't be serious. I am. She met their eyes. We give them a choice. Surrender and stand with us, or burn. Duran's jaw clenched. They'll never agree. Maybe not, she admitted, but we give them the chance. A long silence followed. Then, begrudgingly, Hesh nodded and activated the comms. Vale leaned forward, speaking with a voice that carried across the stars. This is Vale Archer of the Human Resistance. She took a breath. Your command is gone. Your empire is crumbling. The war is over. She let those words sink in. But we all know this fight was never truly between us. There's something worse out there. Something coming. You ran from it. We fought you because we didn't know the truth. But now we do. She paused. So here's the deal. You surrender. Fully, unconditionally. You stand down. And in return, when the real enemy arrives, we stand together. Another pause. Or you refuse, and we wipe you out here and now. Silence stretched. Then, one by one, the HFY warships began shutting down their weapon systems. Duran exhaled sharply. Damn, didn't see that coming. Vale leaned back, heart still pounding. She had expected at least some of them to fight. But perhaps in the end, even the HFY knew the truth. They weren't the invincible empire they once were. They weren't gods. And now, with their empire in ruins, they had no choice but to accept the one thing they had once mocked, humanity's mercy. Weeks later, in orbit above what was once Earth, the future of two species was being decided. The last of the human fleet and the remnants of the HFY survivors had formed something new, not an alliance, not yet, but an understanding. The war was over, but a greater war was coming. Vale stood at the observation deck of their newly captured flagship, staring at the vastness of space. The stars stretched out before her, endless and untamed. A door slid open behind her. Duran stepped in. Final reports are in. Zelvar prisoners are being integrated into the new fleet. Some of them are actually willing to fight alongside us. Vale smirked. Desperation makes strange allies. Duran sighed, leaning against the railing. Still doesn't feel real, you know. Vale knew exactly what he meant. They had won. But the cost of that victory would stay with them forever. The silence stretched between them until Duran finally spoke again. Riker would have liked this. Vale's grip tightened on the railing. Yeah. She let the silence linger before turning to face him. We're not done. Duran raised an eyebrow. Oh. Vale nodded, her expression hardening. The Hollow Ones are still out there, she said. And if what Wolf said was true, then everything we've been through, everything we've lost. She exhaled. It was just the beginning. Duran smirked. You saying we're gonna take on an ancient death force that eats civilizations? Vale returned the smirk. I'm saying we're humanity. She turned back to the stars. And if the Hollow Ones are coming, she clenched her fists. We're gonna show them exactly why humans never stop fighting. The stars stretched before them. A war was over, but a new war was about to begin. And this time, humanity wasn't alone. This time, they would rise together.